U.S. Naval War College is the Navy's home of thought. Established in 1884, NWC has become the center of naval sea power, both strategically and intellectually. The following Issues in National Security lecture is specifically designed to offer scholarly lectures to all participants. We hope you enjoy this upcoming discussion and future lectures.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 6th Issues in National Security lecture for this academic year. I'm Captain Dunn Ricino, and I'm stepping in for John Jackson, who usually hosts these lectures. I'd like to note that we are gathered here in person, and we also have a large audience dialed in via Zoom. Over the 2024 to 2025 academic year, we will be offering 10 lectures from some of the best scholars in the world from our resident faculty. This effort is intended to share a portion of the Naval War College's academic experience with the spouses and significant others of our student body. We also welcome participation by the entire Naval War College extended family, including members of the Naval War College Foundation, international sponsors, civilian employees, colleagues throughout Naval Station Newport, and others around the globe. While the primary purpose is to share information and learn together, we do offer documentation in the form of certificates of completion to all participants who attend at least 70% of the attended lectures. You can participate here in the audience, via Zoom, or even by watching the lectures when they are posted on YouTube. We ask you to keep track of how and when you participate, and we will ask you to self-certify your completion towards the end of this series. And on to the main event. At the conclusion of the presentation that follows, we will welcome questions from our in-person audience. Please use the microphones located at each seat so all of us, including our virtual participants, can hear the question. So now on to the educational portion. The lecture, What Would Nelson Say?, examines strategic and operational dynamics in the Western Pacific through the eyes of Lord Horatio Nelson, Great Britain's god of naval war during its struggles with Revolutionary and Napoleonic France. Lord Nelson commanded the Royal Navy fleet in a string of stirring victories, including, most notably, the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. The second president of the Naval War College, Alfred Thayer Mahan, lauded him as the embodiment of British sea power, and Trafalgar as an icon of command of the sea. Nelson had some pointed insights into the nature of naval warfare that can help identify problems confronting the United States and its allies amid the rise of maritime China, and perhaps solutions as well. Our lecturer, Dr. James Holmes, is the inaugural J.C. Wiley Chair of Maritime Strategy. He is a graduate of Vanderbilt University, Salve Regina University, Providence College, and the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Dr. Holmes graduated from the Naval War College in 1994 and earned the Naval War College Foundation Award as the top graduate in his class. He is a distinguished fellow at the Brute Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare and a non-resident fellow at the University of Georgia School of Public and International Affairs. A former U.S. Navy surface warfare officer, he served as engineering and gunnery officer on board the battleship Wisconsin, BB-64. He directed an engineering course at the Surface Warfare Officers School Command and taught strategy and policy at the Naval War College. College of Distance Education. His books include 2 editions of Red Star Over the Pacific, China's Rise and Challenge to U.S. Maritime Strategy, A Brief Guide to Maritime Strategy, and most recently, Habits of Highly Effective Maritime Strategists. His books appear on the U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, and Indo-Pacific Command professional reading lists. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Holmes.
Thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out. This lecture has its origins in a professional highlight, in a personal highlight for me. A couple of years ago, I guess it was about 2.5 years ago, I was invited up to the Union Club in Boston, which sits. If you've never been there, you got to walk up there. It overlooks Boston Common. It overlooks the 54th Massachusetts monument by Augustine St. Gaudens. If you look at to your right, you actually see the Boston State House, so it's just an awesome setting. The really cool thing about that, I was invited to prepare a talk for Trafalgar Day. which as we've already heard, is going to be central to the presentation this afternoon. And it's really neat because you get to have dinner at the Union Club and you get to stay overnight. One of the upsides for me, I'm not sure if this is an upside or not, but my old grandmother of Tennessee is probably still turning over in her grave at her grandson having spoken at one of the epicenters of Union sentiment from the Civil War. She was pretty reconstructed, if you know what I mean. So I want to spend a few minutes talking about the situation in the Pacific and what we might do about it, looking through not only the eyes of Lord Nelson, but of an assorted cast of characters, including some from pop culture. So I want to keep it pretty upbeat, but I also want to make some serious points about the situation and again how we can try to manage that as the American Sea Services and as a joint force, including not just the Marine Corps but also the Army, the Air Force, and the Space Force, as well as our allied forces, without whom we have no strategic position in the Western Pacific or in the wider world. So let me launch right into it. Here's the man of the day. What would Nelson say about these things? As we've already heard, this is the god of naval war. He's the embodiment of the sea power of Great Britain, as Alfred Thayer Mahan said in a two-volume biography of Nelson. Mahan did not write a few words. He only seemed to write multi-volume sets, as you'll find if you've already studied here at the college. So he's somebody we can ask. He's not going to tell us how to defend against anti-ship ballistic missiles or any modern newfangled technologies or drones or any of that sort of stuff. But he can shed light on the big issues confronting us all as we try to defend our strategically defensive aims in the wider world, uphold the status quo over which the United States has presided since 1945 or thereabouts. So, as we've already heard, this is about the embodiment of sea power. This is an image from the Battle of Trafalgar in 1804 or in 1805 rather. This is the gold standard for sea power. If you're Mahan, it's about going in against a peer competitor fleet from a position of strength and basically sweeping that fleet from the sea. Unlocking a wealth of blessings for the victorious fleet, from being able to squeeze your enemy's seagoing economy to being able to land troops and do everything else that you can do if you rule the maritime commons. So this is very important. Some of the cast of characters, I mentioned that we would have a large cast of characters this hour. Here's a few of them. First of all, Mahan himself. And I understand that the Mahan reading room is finally over after a protracted renovation, and I think you can finally go in and actually see this portrait, which hangs right in the Mahan Rotunda. Certainly my favorite spot here at the Naval War College, as well as the Mahan reading room. Mahan, of course, he was probably, in fact, he was almost certainly the most influential maritime historian and maritime strategist in history, operating right here at the Naval War College. He was our president twice, and he ultimately retired from the Navy and went on to write so many works that a bibliography of his works is itself a book. That tells you something about the productivity of this man and the influence that he cast across the United States at the turn of the century. This is Sir Julian Corbett, Mahan's contemporary and sometimes intellectual adversary, as we'll see this hour. They agreed on many, if not most things. They took a different perspective on some things, and sometimes they actually butted heads on big issues in maritime strategy and naval warfare. This, too, is a person of significant accomplishments and also significant influence. He advised Admiral Jackie Fisher, who in effect, before World War I, reinvented the Royal Navy for the challenges of World War I. So he was not only a teacher, but also he was part of the inner circle and somebody who exercised significant policy and strategic clout. Ended up writing the first 3 volumes of the official history of the Royal Navy in World War I. The only reason he didn't write the whole thing is because he passed away while he was writing that series. So in essence, this is Mahan's peer and somebody who sheds additional light on some of the topics that Mahan raised. Fast forwarding to our own day, this is Captain Wayne Hughes, who wrote the famous. In fact, you're not allowed to say the title of his books without saying the classic work, Fleet Tactics. It's so good that I still drag around my old dog-eared copy from 1985 when I was a midshipman. He was an institution out at Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey until his death late in 2019. And I was proud. I never met him in the flesh, but I was proud for the last decade decade of his life to call him a pen pal. So again, this is a person who mastered the tactical, the fleet tactics, the operational dimensions of naval warfare, and really raised an entire, at least one generation of naval officers, if not more. Another character who will put in an appearance from time to time, this is the now retired Commandant of the Marine Corps, General David Berger, who fashioned a way of thinking about maritime strategy, joint maritime strategy in the Western Pacific that I think has found favor in Washington to this day. Whether this approach that he prescribed endures into the new Trump administration, I guess we will see. We really haven't seen any indications one way or the other because the administration is so new. But in any event, he ushered in a serious reinvention of Marine Corps operations, doctrine, and strategy that is still playing out to this day. The agenda is pretty straightforward. These are the three things that I think Nelson would discuss with us were he here today. And he seemed to prescribe a very straightforward approach to naval tactics, basically go straight at them. He urged naval commanders to remember that the fort outguns any ship. And that's even more true than it was in the days of Lord Nelson. And I think it's becoming increasingly true as technology, as sensors, as computers and whatnot advance. The fort is extending its reach farther and farther offshore. And lastly, in order to crack the code, in order to overcome the fort and accomplish our aims in the Western Pacific or wherever the battleground might be, he would urge us to try to unlock the capacity of all the armed services to contribute to winning command of the sea and the blessings that it bestows. So there's the bottom line up front. I think these are the areas in which Nelson would discourse with us if we could conjure him up today, which unfortunately we cannot. Okay, let me start right out. As I said, we'll have a little pop culture from the age of Nelson, and the age of the Napoleonic Wars. This, of course, comes from the greatest Navy movie, in my view, ever, Master and Commander. If you all remember, and by the way, if you've never seen this, I urge you to run, do not walk, to stream it. It's just a fantastic film from 2003. Yeah, you know how Captain Jack Aubrey did. He loved to sit around with his officers in the evening over dinner and swill white wine and tell sea stories and tell jokes and whatnot. On one of these occasions, as we saw, they took to talking about the character of Lord Nelson. And one of the officers looks at it and he says, Nelson might not be a great tactician, but he does say, just go straight at him. Basically, point your ship at that of the adversary and go in and blast away at close range, which is something the Royal Navy excelled at doing. And we don't know that Nelson actually said that in those exact words, but this is a direct quotation from Nelson. No captain can do very wrong if his ship alongside that of an enemy and blazes away. This was a very different approach from the French Navy, which preferred to stand off and basically try to foul the rigging of enemy ships and basically disable them. This is an approach that finds its way into Mahan's works on command of the sea. So Nelson's talking in tactical terms. This is what Mahan says about operations and strategy. It's about amassing overbearing power upon the sea, basically driving off or sinking your adversary's fleet so that you control the maritime common, and thus, again, you can crimp your adversary's economy. You can bring the hurt on your adversary in many ways. So this is a very sound tactical doctrine, but it really, oversimplifying it really obscures a lot. And that's something that Corbett will spend a lot of time talking about in his book, Some Principles of Maritime Strategy, which I'll parse with you a little bit. So not so fast, as Coach Corso sometimes tells us when he protests a game pick in the fall during college football season. So again, Mahan is right, Nelson is right on the tactical doctrine. This is the way to approach it if you can. But if you can't, what do you do? Well, here's the doctrine of command of the sea again. It urges, if you read Mahan, he's all offense all the time. He doesn't really seem to think about risk to the fleet. He doesn't really seem to think about the relative balance of forces at a particular time and place. He simply overlooks a lot. Part of this is because he was trying to shape attitudes in the United States in the late 19th century. He wanted the United States to found an offensively minded fleet and do this kind of thing. So again, sound tack. Oh, I'm very sorry, I went backwards. Here's what Corbett had to say about this matter. You can't always be on offense. No Navy is going to be stronger at every place on the nautical chart at every time. It simply doesn't work that way. The Royal Navy has global commitments. It has to devote resources to contingencies at a lot of different places, and it might be weaker than a particular adversary. Let me break this down a little bit. We may be Mahanian in outlook. We may have this battle faith. Yes, we should fight for maritime command, but we can't always do it. It makes no sense. I mean, if we're stronger, yes, we should be Mahanian. We should go for the jugular and try to win command of the sea on day one. But if we're weaker, it makes no sense to just rush in and fight an engagement knowing that you're probably going to lose. So again, if circumstances are advantageous, we might not be able to win. If they are disadvantageous, we may not be required to fight. We might just refuse to fight until we have built up an advantage. So, and this is how Corbett codifies his ideas. It's an idea called active defense. The idea being that even if you're weaker than your adversary, you might be able to deny your adversary the benefits of maritime command. And he raises two problems that were pervasive in the age of sail. Here's what he says. And I'll break this one down for you as well. There were two serious questions. If I'm stronger, it's less about how to defeat the enemy than how to get the enemy to come out and fight. Because if the enemy knows that he's weaker, he should refuse battles. So how do you do it? You attack something that he has to defend whether he wants to or not. If the Royal Navy contingent happens to be weaker, it's not about just fighting to the death. It's about how to remain in active life and balk your enemy's aims. If you do that, if I can prevent the adversary from attaining his goals, at that point I've won time. I can build up my own strength, and at that point I can undertake a Mahanian battle for maritime command. So the answer to the first question that I posed to Lord Nelson is, yes, so go straight at him, but not necessarily. Don't be foolish. Manage risk, manage opportunity cost, manage all these things that go into naval warfare. Don't be like John Cleese in the old Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Playing Sir Lancelot, all he knows how to do is draw his sword and lay about himself and lay waste to everything, including at one point a wedding party. So that's Corbett points out that Nelson was not mindlessly on the offensive. He knew how to do active defense. And indeed, Corbett conjures up Nelson, just the way Mahan does, as authority for his own doctrines. Secondly, a ship's a fool to fight a fort. This is a statement attributed to Lord Nelson. Some people will contest that he actually said that. We know that Wayne Hughes did because he makes it a cornerstone of naval warfare. Excuse me. Okay, a little more pop culture, also from the Napoleonic era. This is an image from the old A&E series back in the 1990s on Horatio Hornblower, another one of my favorites. This is an image out of the United States Navy during this era. This is the USS Philadelphia, the frigate Philadelphia, which actually went in under the guns of Tripoli in 1804, ran aground under enemy guns, and had to be burned by Stephen Decatur. And it's a detachment from our very own USS Constitution, sailing intrepid to the left. So they had to burn the frigate so that the enemy didn't get it. Here's what Wayne Hughes has to say about the relative balance between shore and sea power. And we'll break this one down as well. Most combat tends to happen in littoral waters, in near shore waters, because wars are basically settled on land because that's where humanity lives. And therefore, navies try to project power and support armies and Marines fighting ashore. It's always been true since the Greeks and the Romans, and it will also remain true. He goes on to list a few of the potential theaters for naval warfare: the Baltic, Aegean, Eastern Mediterranean, the Gulf, the South and East China Seas, all the places that we hear about in the daily news, except the Red Sea. He does not mean the Red Sea, or he does not list the Red Sea, but I think he would if he were with us today. And therefore, he makes a cornerstone. He has 6 cornerstones of naval warfare, one of which is do not fight a fort lightly. Think about how to manage that disadvantage to naval forces posed by shore-based forces. What does the fort look like? This is an image from 1904 and 1905 in the Russo-Japanese War, a case that we actually spent a week with in our ILC here at the Naval War College. These are the guns of Port Arthur. The Russian fleet had a habit of remaining under the guns in order to fend off a superior Imperial Japanese Navy fleet commanded by Admiral Togo. So again, you combine the firepower of the fort with that of the fleet, and you can hope to shift the balance against a superior foe. But I mean, think about that. What's the range of that? That's a very short range gun. Gunnery is pretty rudimentary in 1904 and 1905. In effect, it cannot threaten an enemy fleet very far out at sea. And that leaves mobility as an option for that superior enemy. But we know that as the 20th century wore on, we know that it is increasingly possible to project precision firepower from land well out to sea. This, of course, being one of the kamikazes aiming at one of our carriers in 1944 or 45. Basically, a precision-guided munition with a human guidance system. So again, the fort's reach is really projecting farther and farther out. As USS Franklin found out in March of 1945 off the coast of Japan. This ship actually survived, by the way, lost 800 sailors, but managed to sail all the way back to New York City before being decommissioned. One of the great stories in U.S. naval history, but certainly a painful day for them. I would say that these are the successors to the guns of Port Arthur here in the 21st century. This is the DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missile fielded by the People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, something that is able to reach hundreds, if not thousands, of miles out to sea against moving ships at sea. In 2015, here's what the narrator at a parade in Beijing had to say about the DF-26 and also its predecessor, the DF-21D, the world's first working anti-ship ballistic missile with a range of about 800 to 900 nautical miles. He basically said, look, this is our assassin's mace. I mean, think about what he's saying. My adversary remains stronger. The United States Joint Force remains stronger, but I have this asymmetric advantage. I can reach out, I can hope to sneak up on my adversary and lay him low with one quick blow with these shore-based armaments. Here's how CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which operates a wonderful missile defense project. If you ever want imagery or information on missile forces, this is sort of your go-to source in the unclassified world. Here's how they chart the ranges of the DF-21D and the DF-26, reaching out from Chinese coastlines. Unfortunately, the geography is a little bit faded out, but look at all the real estate that is overshadowed by these shore-based armaments. The DF-26 reaches beyond the second island chain, beyond Guam. This delineates not necessarily no-go territory, but this is certainly the reach in which our forces will start coming in harm's way as they approach the Asian seaboard. So this is something we really have to contend with. This is what the fort is all about these days, and something we have to try to manage. But it's not just missiles. There's also shore-based aircraft. This is an old H-6, the venerable H-6 PLA Air Force aircraft armed with anti-ship missiles. Apparently, it can launch drones. You see images out on the internet of it doing so. a family of tactical aircraft. If you get the idea, there's a whole lot of shore-based implements that can now influence events at sea, just as Wayne Hughes would tell us, and in fact did tell us in his books. So a ship is a fool to fight a for, even now, more than in the days of Lord Nelson. I would posit that this is sort of what the access denial zone looks like. You won't find Chinese commentators saying, "Oh, it stops at 1,500 nautical miles," but it does feel that that's sort of the effective reach of these shore-based implements. So this would be a hypothesis about how far China can reach offshore. I will say that I think that China would like the access denial zone to reach as far offshore as Chinese weaponry can take it. So this is a way to think about new developments in China. This is what I think Fortress China looks like. But it's not just shore-based implements like airplanes and missiles and so forth. The fort also operates swarms of small craft of various types, submarines, surface craft of various types, all packing anti-ship cruise missiles and other newfangled implements. This is a concept, this idea of the je ne sais, the new school of naval warfare. It had its origin in the late 19th century in the French Navy. Think about what the French Navy was trying to do in the 19th century. It did not want to go out and have Mahanian engagements against the Royal Navy, which was the gold standard of the time. What it did want to do is field a Navy that was able to keep the Royal Navy at arm's length so that it could not approach French sea coasts and thus oppress the French. The French were then as now were primarily interested in events on land. So if they could mount sort of a cushion against the Royal Navy, they had done enough. And they could do it on the cheap. And this was the best part of the je ne sais, according to Admiral Aube of the French Navy. This is what these super empowered small craft tended to look like back at the turn of the century. I mean, they're small craft. They're cheap. You can build swarms of them. Why can you do that? Because a new technology is enabling you to do so. Sea mines are becoming a thing. Torpedoes are becoming a thing. These are implements that can do grave harm, even to battleships, to capital ships of all type. All of a sudden, if the Royal Navy's capital ship fleet comes within reach of these implements, it can really suffer a lot of damage, and therefore it tends to stand off. This has become a feature of naval warfare ever since, from World War I pretty much to the present. I think this is a fleet of torpedo boats out of the Royal Norwegian Navy, but you get the idea. Here's how Theodore Roppin, a historian of the Second World War, put it in the old Makers of Modern Strategy in 1943. David cannot defeat Goliath, but you know what? He can hit him with his missile at long range, and thus circumscribe his freedom of action, his freedom of movement. And that's a significant thing in naval warfare. In fact, Corbett in his book, I didn't build in the quotation, but Corbett looks back and he says, well, you know, we're trying to extract principles of naval warfare from the age of sail. All of a sudden, that's an unreliable resource in some ways. This is a historical revolution that makes reliance on the past suspect when we're starting to think about tactics and operations in the age of steam and beyond. So again, the fort operating not just shore-based implements but also sea-based implements can really limit the freedom of action of a superior navy. Imperial Japan updated this basic idea during the 1920s and 1930s. This is Japan's initial scheme for how to fight World War II. Keep in mind the Pearl Harbor strategy was pretty late breaking, not really till the fall of 1941. This was in fact, this is a much better playbook in my view than the Pearl Harbor attack. So what's the idea? Well, Imperial Japan has inherited German islands from Germany at the Treaty of Versailles, concluding World War I. It's going to station aircraft on those islands. It's going to put submarines in the waters around those islands. And it's going to cut the U.S. Pacific fleet down to size as it makes its way into the Western Pacific, presumably to relieve the Philippine Islands, which of course ended up being one of the early targets. That was recognized for a very long period of time. So the idea is you use these various implements to cut a superior fleet down to size as a precursor to a decisive Bahanian or Nelsonian European engagement somewhere in the Western Pacific. So this would allow the Imperial Japanese Navy to come out and fight with reasonable hopes of success against the U.S. Pacific Fleet, which was reckoned to be the superior fleet. But you can make the difference by doing an active defense strategy like this one. If you update this for modern times, you find super-empowered small craft in the PLA Navy inventory. This China field, the PLA Navy fields about 85 of these Type 22 Hobeis, each sporting 8 anti-ship cruise missiles. Very short-range craft, suitable for lurking in the China seas, should the United States Navy and its allies venture into those waters. So this is a way of doing the Theodore Roth thing and mounting that sort of cushion for Chinese seacoasts, which is very important to China. It needs to fend off attacks on the vital economic infrastructure at special economic zones up and down the Chinese seacoast. So I think that this looks a lot like a je ne sais quoi craft. I would describe this probably still to this day as the core of the PLA Navy. They've put a lot of effort into conventional submarines. Again, toting anti-ship cruise missiles, suitable for doing picket duty, for doing offshore sentry duty, to again make things difficult on an approaching fleet from the United States Joint Force and its allies. So again, these are very. They have imported Kilo-class submarines and improved on those since the 1990s, and again have built a large force that seems very effective to me. And again, you have also families of tactical aircraft operating in conjunction with these small surface craft to mount a layered defense against the United States Pacific Fleet, converging on East Asia to join up with forces already in the theater, to reverse Chinese aggression in the Taiwan Strait or the South China Sea, or pick your favorite battleground, wherever the fight might happen. I think the operating grounds for these small surface craft and submarines are probably roughly the same as I delineated for the offshore fire support zone. Again, here you go. They can reach out and make things very difficult on a superior adversary that's trying to close in on Asian battlefields. If you add all this up, the shore-based firepower, shore-based submarines and surface craft, to me, this is what it feels like. And in fact, a few years ago, I think it was 2017, I briefed C&O Richardson, Chief of Naval Operations down in Washington, on this idea, and I described it as a crumple zone. It's a bend but don't break defense. I mean, think about what the crumple zone in your car is. It's not a rigid component. It's designed to collapse upon collision in a controlled way and basically absorb the shock of a collision and safeguard whatever it is that you care about in the cabin, whether it's yourself, your family, your dog, whatever you're trying to protect when you're in an accident. It feels like that's what China has in mind. It wants to field sort of a bend but don't break a defense against U.S. intervention in Asia. If they can keep us from joining forces in the Western Pacific, they can prevent us from mounting superior force at the right time in the right place. They can undo our operational art in the Western Pacific, and thus, in the ideal case, they would stop us using all these stuff, and they wouldn't even have to fight a decisive battle. Short of that, they can weaken us. They can do what Imperial Japan envisioned doing, weaken us as a precursor to a decisive engagement, which the PLA Navy Surface Fleet could hope to win. So beware of the fort. How do you handle this? This is a real and growing and ever more formidable problem for naval commanders and joint force commanders to this day. And lastly, we got to fight jointly. We need to leverage all the capabilities of all the U.S. military services and our allies if we're going to overcome this increasingly difficult situation in the Western Pacific and other places. Last bit of pop culture, also from the old Horatio Hornblower films. The Royal Navy, and fighting in conjunction with the British Army, they were very effective at using joint sea power to influence events on land. This is Major Edrington. Basically, the theme of that particular episode was that the leadership in London was going to try to land an expeditionary force on the French seacoast and basically restore the French monarchy to power and overthrow Napoleon. It didn't turn out well. It did not turn out well, and in fact, they ended up having to retreat to the sea. But nonetheless, this was an incident of something that the British in real life did quite effectively, especially in Iberia, where a force in the 1807 timeframe landed in Portugal and then fought in Spain in concert with partisans to basically impose a secondary theater on Napoleon and sap his strength in the main theater, which was to France's east. If you can do that, if you can bog down a hostile force, that's a pretty impressive thing to do. And indeed, this approach was so effective that Napoleon called it his Spanish ulcer. So joint sea power can be an ulcer for your adversary if you do things right. I mean, think about what an ulcer is. It's not fatal. It's always there. It distracts you. It consumes your resources as you try to beat it. This is the kind of thing that you can get using joint power from the sea, or joint power from the sea, military power from the sea. Here we see the retreat. I mean, there's the option. This is always an option. If things go poorly on land, the Royal Navy, the offshore Navy can actually come and extract that force if things do go poorly. And again, they did. As we know, Napoleon was not overthrown until 1815, and certainly not in the early going. So that's the bad news. The good news is that you can actually hope to build your own fort. I mean, access denial works both ways. It's not just a Chinese thing. It's not just the defender's prerogative. The United States enjoys certain military advantages, certain geographic advantages, and certain alliance advantages, especially along the island chains in East Asia, and can leverage those to try to create a deterrent to Chinese aggression. This is an idea I've been pushing for some time in places like the Naval Institute proceedings. This one dates from 2014, and my only time appearing in the Marine Corps Gazette with General Bowers, who's now the head of Marine Corps recruiting. He was second in charge at 3MEF out in Okinawa in those days. We purported. We were kind of venturesome, I guess. We purported to add another cornerstone of naval operations to the ones that Wayne Hughes had listed in his book. And that's basically do access denial things sort of on a micro level within East Asia, just as China's trying to do them on a theater-wide scale, as I've shown here today. So again, the seventh cornerstone that we proposed is that the home team has the advantage. And we are the home team in certain circumstances in concert with our allies such as Japan, such as the Philippine Islands, Australia, and so forth. This is an approach, I think this is a logic that's found its way into Marine Corps doctrine in documents like this, the tentative manual for expeditionary advanced base operations, into literal operations from a contested environment, into the idea of stand-in forces that refuse to be driven from the theater. They basically they stay there. They do scouting things for the fleet. They contribute in a multitude of ways without being driven out of the fleet being driven out of the theater rather the way we were in 1941 and 1942. This is an approach Representative Mike Gallagher, who's now retired and in private industry. He chaired the China Committee in the House until retiring about this time last year. The idea is we could create an anti-Navy using islands, using alliance relations, using geography imaginatively to deny access to the PLA Navy or whoever the adversary might be. PLA Navy being the most obvious target of this. If you think about how this would work in practice, this is something that my former professor here, my friend and former professor here, Toshi Yoshihara, and I have called a Great Wall in reverse. If we own the contested real estate, if our allies own the contested real estate, as they do, think about it, the first island chain is occupied entirely by allies, friends, or partners of the United States, including Taiwan. If you position sensors, if you position weapons, anti-ship weapons, anti-air weapons of all types along the first island chain, you can mount what you can call a Great Wall in reverse. You can close the straits to enemy surface forces, to the merchant fleet, to aircraft, and so forth. If you do that, you've limited China's access to the wider world. You've put the hurt on its economy. You've denied it maneuver space in the Western Pacific. You've done a lot using land land in concert with technology and alliance relations. And if you do that, if you can threaten credibly to cut China off from the wider world and basically make a nightmare out of what Xi Jinping calls China's dream of rejuvenating the nation, that's a pretty powerful deterrent if you can do it, again, credibly, and make Xi Jinping and the party leadership a believer in your ability to do that. This is a logic that I think animates. This is a graphic out of one of Japan's annual defense documents. And it shows exactly where the self-defense forces are positioning forces on those islands, whether it's the ground or the air self-defense force. This is the idea that I think you find in U.S. Marine Corps doctrine, Navy doctrine, and so forth here in the United States as well. And it just makes sense. If you do this, you're holding Japanese territory, which is obviously a good thing, and you're also using it as an implement of deterrence and potentially of the ability to defeat Chinese aggression from land in concert with the fleet, which is kind of a good thing, of course. Here's General Berger one more time. Man, think about it. When he talks about stand-in forces, again, these are forces that remain stubbornly present within the enemy's weapons engagement zone to make difficult. This is almost a way of giving China its own ulcer, giving Xi Jinping his first island chain ulcer, making things really difficult by manning those guard towers that are the islands and using weapons placed on those islands in order to close the straits in between the islands and erect that Great Wall in reverse. Some of the implements are some of the ones that we've seen play out in the Russia-Ukraine war. These are HIMARS batteries, one of the stars of the show in Ukraine. They can fire anti-ship missiles at great distances, sufficient to overshadow those straits and create that edifice against Chinese aggression. Other things, think of diesel submarines. This is a Japanese Soryu-class submarine, sort of an earlier model, acclaimed the best large conventional submarine in the world. The JMSDF is extraordinarily proficient at monitoring and blocking those straits, having done so really since its inception after the Cold War. It became very good at doing this during the Cold War, to the extent that the Soviet Navy a lot of the times would stay within the first island chain rather than try to force the straits. This is a playbook that can be reopened and refreshed to this day. And you get the idea. Anything that you can use to inhibit maritime movement is something that is very valuable in this approach to operations and strategy. This is a Swedish Visby corvette, stealthy corvette, again, that is suitable for interdicting maritime traffic and could find its way into the mix if we or our allies built our own equivalents to this. So again, good access to Nile platform. But I've made this a joint endeavor. This sort of photo is not uncommon anymore. You see the United States, and this is a beautiful thing, you see the United States Air Force and the United States Army in particular really embracing their maritime functions as implements of sea power. This, of course, is a B-52 bomber dropping a quick strike precision minefield. You can do that along the first island chain or at other critical points in order to inhibit maritime movement by the adversary. Unmanned vehicles of all types are starting to find their way into the fleet. I think we're still in an experimental mode where we're trying to figure out exactly what types we need and how we're going to use them. But I think it is fair to say that they are going to be part of the hybrid fleet that is starting to take shape and that our leadership has really dedicated itself to. So again, these are things that you can use to encumber and inhibit maritime movement. And I think that's a good thing. Air Force again. Here we see a B-1B launching one of our new long-range anti-ship missiles, part of a family of anti-ship systems that is really coming along pretty fast, which is a good thing as well. If you could do that, if you want to shift into a sports way of looking at this Great Wall in reverse strategy, think about what the islands are. In football terms, they're basically the linemen. And it's all about trying to figure out how to firm up the line. If you can do that, if you can use a flotilla-like craft, such as small craft, submarines, and whatnot, to firm up the first island chain, at that point, you can use the U.S. Navy surface fleet, our carrier forces, our surface action groups, and so forth, as free safeties operating behind the line in order to firm up any breakouts that might occur through that Great Wall. And I think that adds up to a pretty good layered defense of our own, and a pretty good deterrent to Chinese aggression. So I think the third lesson I would draw out of Lord Nelson's life and times is that we need to think about ground-based services as sea services as well. And again, I think this is really happening pretty fast. In fact, and unfortunately he retired, but General Charlie Flynn, who commanded U.S. Army forces in the Pacific until sometime last year. He's from Middletown, Rhode Island, by the way, which is actually kind of cool, within sight of the War College. But he was fond of telling his troops that the Indo-Pacific, the Western Pacific in particular, is a ground theater. It's all about seizing and holding key terrain, and using systems like this in order to support the fleet and deny access and freedom of mobility to the adversary. And in fact, the Army has, I believe it's still there. There's an anti-ship, a Typhoon anti-ship missile battery on the island of Luzon right now that can reach into the Taiwan Strait and out into the South China Sea, which is a good thing. Our Chinese friends hate it, so it's probably a good thing. But in any event, we need to enlist all implements of sea power behind this common cause. So, I think Nelson would probably tell us it's no longer, if we could ask him, it's no longer all about high seas engagements solely between navies. It's about operating in proximity to land. It's about using all elements of sea power to strategic effect, and thus hopefully deterring or, if necessary, defeating our adversaries. So if we reduce all this to one slide, and I'll close right here. Here's what I think Nelson would say: go on offense when you can. Do active defense when you have to. It makes no sense to play offense when you're the weaker adversary. And that's just a matter of judgment for the commander. Do things to outwit and evade the fort and blunt its impact at sea. Not an easy thing to do, but I think that's the task before us. Build your own fort and make things and use that to complicate your own adversary's strategy. Balk is strategy until such time as you can build up superior forces at the time and place of battle, and thus prevail. And lastly, and once again, fight jointly with every sort of service that we have at our behest, as well as our allies. And yeah, I think I hope that's an accurate representation of what Nelson might tell us. But that's certainly what I pull out of him. Again, he's not going to tell us about tactics or technology or anything like that. But he does illuminate some of the bigger issues confronting us. And with that, I will shut up. I'm going to wet my whistle one more time, and then I will take whatever questions you would like to pose. Yeah, don't tell me we've solved the entire problem in an hour. Yes, sir, please.
Hello, Matt Young, Army, and I'm a senior student here at the Naval War College. So in Ukraine, we saw the Ukrainians able to use small unmanned boats to be able to basically drive the Russians from their part of the Black Sea. Using that as a model, does that more support China? Is it something that the US can use? How does that factor into any potential conflict in Taiwan?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's potentially, and you're talking about the interactive dimensions of strategy. I mean, gosh, I don't think I mentioned Clausewitz. I'm probably going to be fired tonight. But yeah, I mean, Clausewitz describes warfare and competition as an interactive process between combatants trying to impose their will on one another. And I mean, there's sort of a back and forth quality, sort of a seesaw quality when the new technology is developed and harnessed and so forth. I think it helps both sides. I mean, we are looking at what former CNO Frank Kennedy called non-traditional sea denial in her navigation plan last year. You're talking about using newfangled implements to deny access to the sea. I mean, think about what Ukraine has done. The Ukrainian armed forces, I mean, they're sort of back on their heels on land, but they've won the war at sea without a navy, using these sort of non-traditional implements of sea denial. So that's something that really works for both sides. I would actually say it probably works. If you made me pick, I would probably say it works for the Allies along the First Island chain more. It's really an approach that's very difficult to counter. I mean, if you can really, I mean, China probably has the most difficult geographic, geostrategic predicament of any great power on the planet, including Russia. I mean, Russia's difficulties with maritime mobility are actually easing a little bit now with climate change, as it can move shipping along the northern frontier and so forth. I mean, that's relieved some of its plight that has been documented amply over the years. But I mean, if you think about China, I mean, it's the first island chain. It completely outflanks the Chinese sea coast. There is no Chinese seaport from which you can reach the high seas without traversing through the island chain, and that makes it a very difficult problem. The fact that it is so difficult for China is really our advantage. So if we can figure out how to harness these non-traditional sea denial implements, that's really a great thing. So so again, I would describe all these drones and whatnot. They're sort of the successors to the flotilla craft that I was talking about when I mentioned the Je Nicole of Admiral Oaty, this new school of naval warfare. And trying to figure out exactly how to put these things to work, I think is the job before us right now. The good news is there are large numbers of, I mean, we're always beating ourselves up about shipbuilding, and rightly so. But when you're talking about building large traditional manned craft such as destroyers or cruisers or whatnot, but there are large numbers of smaller shipyards that can build smaller craft, sort of in the 1 to 300 feet range, which could be uncrewed and which could be put to work as implements like this. And I think that's kind of the idea that's abroad out there. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I did an event out at First Beach with a bunch of business types who were developing drones, and it was called the Blue Innovation Summit. It was really a great event. But a lot of these entrepreneurs, they are developing these things, but they're having a hard time selling them to Uncle Sam. It's just because they're so unconventional and so forth. But I hope that we're getting our brains around that and can start tapping these new capabilities, because there's some pretty impressive stuff out there. But any others? Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. Ensign Markham, Supply Corps Officer, United States Navy. What would Nelson say and what would he recommend when it comes to sustaining the fight in the South China Sea?
Sustainment. As it happens, I'm going over to give a talk at the supply school tomorrow on logistics challenges. Yeah, he didn't really say too much about it. I mean, he didn't really say a whole lot about sustainment, but I think that's kind of an artifact of his times. I mean, think about the nature of naval warfare and the age of sail. I mean, a serious changeover happened during the age of Mahan and Corbett. This was the change from sail over to steam at that point, or diesels or whatnot. If you think about what happens, I mean, you don't have to worry about fuel if you're a sailing craft, because the wind provides it or takes it away, depending on what Mother Nature wants to have to do that day. I mean, there's not a huge logistical challenge as far as making the ship go. It's basically just whatever the crew needs as far as food and stores and whatnot. So he didn't really have a whole lot to say about the logistical problem. Mahan says a lot about it, and other maritime strategists say a lot about it, because once you have coal-fired or ultimately oil-powered shipping, at that point you're tethered to your bases. You gotta have. It's Bradley Fisk, an admiral in the United States Navy a century ago. He liked it. He almost sounded like the base was almost your USB port. You have to put into it and recharge once in a while, using stores and fuel and all these kinds of things. Mahan actually he was not a master wordsmith, but he had his moments. He actually talked about this, and he says, and he's making the case for the United States Navy obtaining base access overseas to support mechanical ships. He said that a navy without overseas bases is like a land bird. It cannot fly far from home. So indirectly, he's paying testament to the logistical challenge, and that's something that we're really grappling with right now. One of the reasons I really admired Secretary Del Toro, our recently departed Secretary of the Navy, he actually put a lot of personal attention and energy into the logistics challenges, such as figuring out how to reload missiles at sea, which was successfully tested last fall, the TRAM system. He's experimented with different. What was it? MCAC. It's basically a way to transform a merchant oiler into a craft that can refuel our oilers, so that we can basically keep those oilers, logistic ships, out at sea with the fleet, so that we don't have to withdraw assets from the sea in order to rearm or reprovision. So So again, yeah, not a lot from Nelson, but you do get a lot from Mahan. That's one real difference between Mahan and Corbett, by the way. I'm sort of getting off the topic here, but it's actually an important one. I talked a little bit about the couple of disputes they had over big ideas, but Mahan, in a sense, he's a grand strategist. I mean, he's thinking about really upper tier. I mean, he's thinking about all implements of maritime power, of sea power, and he's also thinking about the makings of sea power. Whether it's national character, are we inclined to go to sea? Do we have a core of maritime-related expertise in shipbuilding industries and so forth? So he's thinking a lot about these things. Whereas Corbett's thinking about using an implement that already exists, the Royal Navy. So I think this helps explain some of the differences and the emphasis between the guys. Mahan, in a sense, is the tool maker, and Corbett is the tool wielder. And I think that's, but yeah, you can really invest. If you haven't read the first 100 pages or so of Mahan's influence of sea power upon history, 1660 to 1783, that's what he's talking about. Trying to fashion a United States Navy that will make the United States a maritime power of note by basically connecting what he calls a chain of sea power between production of ships and wares at home, the ability to use the sea in the middle, and then foreign access to foreign seaports to sell and also to replenish your ships at the far end of their voyages. So that's sort of the go-to place to start thinking about logistics. And then there's other works out there. Henry Eccles, for whom our library here is named at the War College, was a famous logistician. And in fact, John Jackson, who should have introduced me were you here tonight, he actually wrote the introduction to that, which was published here at the War College in the 1980s. Wonderful book on logistics. But yeah, there are a few really good works out there on sustainment. Long-winded answer to a short question. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Will Edwards Bannon. I'm from the Royal Navy here on the senior course. Given what we know about Nelson's character and the advancements that have taken place over the last 250 years, I wonder whether you think he would still join the Navy if he was choosing a service branch today, or if he'd be enticed by another option.
That's really interesting. I think I have before coming back to Newport in 2007, I worked at the University of Georgia, and I took to saving fortunes from my favorite Chinese place in Athens, and I keep them taped to my computer screen to this day. My favorite one is, the beginning of wisdom is learning to shrug. And I think I actually don't know, but that's really a fascinating question. I mean, would he still be a seafarer, or would he be an airman? Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, what's the equivalent to he might be an airman, actually. If you think about fighting for command of the air, so something that we've been talking about for the last century. But as far as his character, I thought you were going to say something about his womanizing, for which he was legend. But I'm not sure that necessarily bears on this. But a fascinating character. Was it Roger? I think it was Roger Knight. You can actually find a wonderful biography of him down in the War College bookstore, which is well worth your time. But yeah, that's actually the kind of questions that studying history actually really raises. There's no real answer, but it does help you think about things and get your bearings on the situation that faces us right now. I might have to think about that one. That's pretty cool.
Hey, Jim, have you had some conversations with any of our fleet commanders or Indo-PACOM commanders, either retired or currently active duty? And where would you characterize them as Corbett, Mahan, or Lord Nelson?
Yes, sir. Thanks for that. And this is a horrible thing to say, but I actually think that we. Well, in fact, I know our Chinese friends read Mahan much more thoroughly and much more deeply than we do even here at the Naval War College. I mean, the amount, and it's kind of just we have so many topics that we need to cover with each class that sea power theory almost gets shoved to the side, especially the works of Mahan, which, as I mentioned, are huge. But I mean, we spend with the juniors, for example, we read that first 100 pages of the influence of sea power upon history. We read about the Maritime War of 1778 between the Royal Navy and the United States, the Continental Navy, and so forth, and that's kind of it. So the upshot of that is that I don't think that we're all that Mahanian minded. I think instinctually we are. I mean, I think he's kind of encoded in our DNA. So in that sense, it's not really the end of the world. But I think we're actually more Corbettian. And I think that makes sense because the implement now exists. We're sort of in Corbett world because the United States Navy, our base infrastructure, our alliances, all that stuff exists. So we're in tool wielding mode. And I think that's, and by the way, Corbett, Mahan is always in student critiques the least favorite of the strategists that we study here at the War College. People hate reading him because he's not a master wordsmith. And by the way, he admitted that in his memoir. He basically said, I'm not a great wordsmith because I'm afraid of being caught out in a mistake. And therefore, I put every disclaimer, every disqualifier, I put every clause and phrase and everything into a particular sentence in order to try to hold up my guard and not be called a mistake. But so students don't enjoy him. They do enjoy reading Corbett, who is a wonderful writer and well worth your time. And by the way, all the works except for Wayne Hughes's that I've shown you on the screen this afternoon are available for free online if you should choose to go out and have a look at them, either at Internet Archive or Google Books or somewhere like that. But yeah, I think that so partly I think we are Corbettian, and partly is simply that Corbett did something really smart and encoded all of his big ideas in a small book. Mahan never did that. No, he didn't. I mean, Corbett's book that I showed you on screen appeared in 1911. Mahan's very last work, his very last book also appeared, he died in 1914, his very last book also appeared that year and was called Naval Strategy, which sounds like it ought to be a great handbook to Mahan's big ideas. But it's not. It's a book comparing war at sea to war on land. So what's a strait is like a defile. I mean, just an interesting book, but he never codified all his big books or his big ideas between two covers, and that was a serious mistake. And I think it's limited his impact because he wrote too much. He wrote too much, and he never gave us a how-to guide to do sea power. And so that's. As far as Nelson wasn't a major theorist, I don't think. We more use him as a source of data. So that's his big idea. He never wrote a book that I know of, and maybe you would know. I don't think Nelson ever wrote anything that I know of. But yeah, letters. Yeah, letters to Emma Hamilton. But which probably can't be discussed in an open forum.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give us a big hand for Dr. James Holmes.
Thanks for bearing with me. I thought my voice was going to give out on me.
And that's our program for tonight. So thank you, Admiral Walker, and everyone for attending this evening. Have a wonderful evening.